these big things that you want to accomplish are great, but what do you have to do day to day? How can we set goals around just the basic day-to-day activity that you are expected to achieve so that you can be proud of finishing that kind of work? I spent the majority of the first quarter talking with managers just like you at companies all over the country about goals. And I have to tell you, there's some confusion about what goals are, what their purpose is, what makes good goals. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about goals and help clear up some confusion so that you can work with your team to set goals that are really going to drive maximum impact within your organization. If this is your first time on the show, my name is Matt Jertson. I'm the founder of Better Everyday Studios. We are a leadership development company that helps turn great engineers into great people managers. And before this, I was a pilot in the US Air Force. I was the head of training and development at SpaceX. And since then, I've worked with dozens of organizations to help make their managers better. When it comes to goals, there's three main areas of confusion that I want to talk about. And as we go through them, I'll explain kind of the impact of that confusion and then also how to clear up that confusion. The first area of confusion that I see for a lot of managers is the difference between two different kinds of goals, milestone goals versus activity goals. I see this all the time, and I honestly think it's the number one reason why goals get forgotten about. I don't know in your organization how goals are set, but most companies have some kind of regular cadence. It's often annual, sometimes it's biannual, where kind of the leadership team and all the various leaders around the company get together, they figure out what the goals are, the managers meet with their team, and then plan goals for each individual person. And very often they're setting what I call milestone goals. We're going to create this thing. We're going to change this product. We're going to achieve some big milestone where you're kind of checking the box. You do it and then you move on. And very often, and it depends on the team, but very often those goals get completely forgotten about. I know when I was working at SpaceX, we had an annual goal setting cycle. And honestly, when we would get back to review the goals, I had completely forgotten that any of the goals existed because they were so divorced from my day-to-day activities. And the reason why they were so divorced is because of these kind of daily activity goals. Many roles within an organization are really driven by daily statistics. If you're a recruiter, how many resumes are you looking at? How many interviews are you scheduling? If you're in sales, how many calls are you making? There's lots of this just kind of keeping the train on the tracks kind of work that dominates a whole lot of roles. But it's different. Some roles just inherently are milestone based, where you get the work done and now you can move on. You don't have to do that work again. Whereas other roles are dominated by this activity, based work where you just have to do it. And once you do it, it doesn't mean you can move on. It doesn't mean the work's gone. There's that work is still there. And so as a manager, what you have to do is look at your team, look at the makeup of the work that they are doing, and make sure you're balancing these appropriately. If you have somebody who's a recruiter who says they're going to create a new recruiting strategy, or they're going to, create a new template for how the managers that they work with are going to interact with them, that's all great. But if they don't take into account the daily activity and set goals around those as well, the truth is that they're just not going to get to these milestone-based goals. And so that's really how you have to think about and solve this confusion. If you don't, then what happens is the goals seem meaningless or unattainable. The people on your team will set these great milestone-based goals, and then they'll go back to work, and they just never seem to carve out enough time in the day to get to those goals. They just get consumed by work. And so if that's happening on your team, you need to have an honest discussion with your team and say, okay, these big things that you want to accomplish are great, but what do you have to do day to day? How can we set goals around just the basic day-to-day activity that you are expected to achieve so that you can be proud of finishing that kind of work as well. It's not just milestones, it's the day-to-day activities that keep an organization running. And so you need to set goals that focus on both of those aspects. And depending on your team, you'll probably have a different ratio of milestone goals versus activity goals. The second major confusion I see in a lot of organizations is the place of kind of personal goals, personal development goals, and I got to tell you that this can have a major impact because very often, if it's not well defined, an organization will have, some managers are just strictly very work focused. How are we going to improve the team? How are we going to improve the bottom line? How are we going to improve the company? And they completely get rid of any personal goals. Whereas you'll have other areas of the company where the managers are like, no, I want to know that you're trying to write a book. I want to know that you want to become a better speaker. And how can we incorporate those into your daily activities, into the goals that will support the company? And I've actually seen, arguments break out between managers because everybody knows that there should be some level of personal goal setting probably included in the goal setting process so that individuals can feel like they too are getting better, that you care about them as an individual. So number one, I highly encourage you to think about what are the personal goals that an individual has and how can you tie that back into the company so that you can have meaningful discussions about checking in with them to make sure they're achieving their objective, to make sure they're moving forward as a person, because you really want to show that you care them about as a person. So number one, if you're not thinking about personal goals and setting those with your team, I highly encourage you to start doing that. But secondly, and almost more importantly, you need to talk to the other managers in your organization to make sure you're all on the same page. What happens if you're not? Well, what happens is you get to the end of the quarter or the year, or whatever the goal cycle is, and somebody's really excited because they achieved their personal goals and they think this is really great. And it turns out the company doesn't care about that. And so then they feel like, well, what does it matter? Obviously the company doesn't care about me. So I feel pretty disengaged now. I'm not getting rewarded at all for all this hard work that I've done. Or the reverse, the company does care about personal goals and they're rewarding some people or at least celebrating some people. And then the other people feel left out because their manager didn't work on them to set any personal goals. And so they're kind of just like, well, wait a minute, why wasn't I included? So if there's not some consistency across the organization, across the various teams, then you're kind of setting yourself up for a lot of disagreements and a lot of infighting or disengagement from your employees. And the third and final area where I see the most confusion, and this is also a really important one and one that happens a lot, is thinking about the interdependencies between teams when you're setting goals. Because let's face it, almost nothing happens alone or in a vacuum these days. Most big things, most of the things that you're going to put on your goals, especially milestone goals, are things that take other people. Like that individual who's setting the goal, if they're not careful, they're going to set goals that involve other people. And then inevitably they're doing their part. They're trying their best to achieve the outcome that they set out. And yet for some reason, they're not able to do it because some other element of the goal, some other person on the team or on some other team isn't doing the work that they need. And so then they don't achieve the goal, but it's not their fault. Or at least they claim it's not their fault. And so what happens when you have goals that are set up with lots of interdependencies, where the person whose goal it is can't achieve the goal on their own? Well, you set yourself up for a couple of problems. One, the company is now put into a position where leadership needs to decide who's responsible here and who should we reward versus who should we not reward because this goal wasn't this goal wasn't achieved. So you as the manager are probably fighting for your people and saying they worked really hard, they did everything, and the company's like, but the goals weren't achieved, so why would we reward them? And you're saying, but they did all this great work. And so it just creates the situation where you have to make a lot of judgment calls that ideally you wouldn't have to make. And then the second thing is it sets people up to be working and against one another, where they're blaming each other when they don't achieve their goals because it's not super clear where their responsibility lies. And you can avoid all of that if during the goal setting process, you as the manager, when working with your team members to set their goals, are thinking about those interdependencies. Can we define this goal in such a way that you control your own destiny? Maybe that's not 100% possible, but whenever you can, you want to try to make it so that if this is a goal for the individual, that the individual has as much responsibility as possible towards achieving that goal. That if somebody else, because there's lots of reasons why things can happen. Priorities can change, people can leave, new work gets added in to different teams. And so you can control the goal setting. You might be able to change the goals on your team if that happens, but on other teams, they might not even be aware that they are needed to achieve the goals for the people on your team. So if you as the manager can think about that ahead of time, it's going to make kind of the end result of the goal setting process a whole lot easier. So like I said, I talk with a lot of managers about goal setting. If you go back through some of these earlier episodes, there are frameworks that I talk about of what good goals look like. But as a manager, you can set the strongest goals possible. You can set goals that are based on the SMART methodology, or they use the OKR method, or whatever it is. But if you get confused by some of these other things, it can still set you up for failure, right? If you are setting only milestone goals when there's tons of daily activity that your team has to take care of, they're never going to get to those milestone goals, and thus they're not going to be excited about the goal setting process. If you don't know whether or not you should set personal goals, how to tie them into the company, what percentage of the goals can be personal versus company related, then you're just making a situation where people are either going to feel like they're not rewarded for doing good work, or like they were left out. And then if you're not thinking ahead of time about the interdependencies of goals and trying absolutely as hard as you can to make sure that the individual who is setting the goal is solely, or at least maximally, responsible for achieving those goals, then you're setting yourself up for problems when you get to the end of the goal cycle. So I hope that helped you. I hope I gave you some good techniques that you can use to clear those things up as we get into the second. We're well into the second quarter now. Hopefully you have some annual goals. Hopefully you're talking about more tactical quarterly or monthly goals. And I think managing these kinds of uncertainties, these points of confusion, can really help you set stronger goals for your team, which is going to lead to more, higher performance, better engagement, and overall a stronger team. I hope that helps, and I can't wait to see you next time on the Leadership Launchpad. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.